Hello again. Thanks for joining us for Love Art at Home, our free online art club. This week we're going to be making Scrummy clay cupcakes, and it's a really good project. It is suitable for beginners, but young children may need a little bit of adult help here and there. So you will need 250 grams of clay, a suitable surface to work on, so perhaps a board or a piece of greaseproof paper, some slip, which is a mixture of clay and water, a paintbrush and some water, a cocktail stick, a lollipop stick, and if you have any icing cutters you can also use those, although they're entirely optional. So to start off with, we're going to make the cupcake base. You need to weigh out 120 grams of clay and roll into a ball using your hands. Next, holding the clay in one hand, push your thumb firmly into the ball of clay, stopping about 1 centimetre from the edge. Next, you need to slowly and gently rotate the clay in your hand whilst pinching together with your thumb and 2 fingers until you have a pot with nice even sides, approximately 1 centimetre thick all the way round. Once you've done that, you can put that to the side to dry for a little bit. Next, you need to weigh out another 120 grams of clay, and this is going to be for the icing on your cupcake. Slowly roll out this clay into a long sausage shape, approximately 1 centimetre thick. Now you'll notice that I'm starting this off on the board, but I'm going to move onto the table, a nice big flat surface, so I've got lots of room to roll out a really long coil of clay. Don't worry too much if it's not a completely even thickness for the whole length of the coil. So once you've rolled out the coil, we're going to lay it on top of the base of your cupcake. We're not going to be using scratch and slip for this part because we're going to be removing it again in a minute. So I want you to slowly lay the coil into the shape of the icing. So with each layer you need to move the coil in slightly so that the circle is getting smaller and smaller until you end up with a point at the top. Now you'll see that my coil has run out, so I need to add another one, which is no problem at all. Just scratch or score both surfaces, add some slip and then join the 2 coils together. Don't worry if you can see where the join is, we can fix that later on. So once you get to the top, I'm just going to pinch off the top into a nice little point. So once you have that, you need to very carefully take it off the base of your cupcake, so you've just got the icing as a separate part. Using something like a lolly stick, I want you to smooth all the coils together on the inside. So just hold the icing really gently in your hand, try not to squish it and squash it out of shape. So just smooth all the coils together until it looks something like this. Once you've done that, you can neaten up the outside of the icing just using some water and a paintbrush to really gently brush over, especially where you've joined coils together. So leave this to one side for it to get a little bit harder and a bit firmer, and just come back to the base. So what you need to do now is just tap the base very gently on the board to make sure that you've got a flat area underneath. If you don't do this, the cupcake may not sit properly on the table when it's finished and it might wobble around. So do make sure you do this, but just do it very gently. Don't tap too hard. Next, you can just check your icing fits on the top. Now, if you want to leave the top of the icing as a separate lid that you can take on and off, that's absolutely fine. If not, I'm going to show you how to join it together later. So the next step is to create some ridges in the base of your cupcake. So you could either use something like a lollipop stick on its side just to make indentations in the clay. Alternatively, you may want to use something like a cocktail stick to scratch some lines in the clay. These can either be done really neatly or quite rough and ready. I quite like to make lots of lines in mine and then smooth them back over a little bit with my finger afterwards so they're not too noticeable. As you'll see that at the end. So it's up to you if you want to have this as a separate lid or if you want it to be attached. Just check the fit. You'll notice on mine that I have a little gap. That's partly because I've made this facing backwards, so I didn't notice it at the time. But you can just use a knife or another sharp tool just to cut off the lump to make it a smooth surface, and then I've just joined on that bit of excess clay to fill in the gap. So you can see now that it fits perfectly. Now personally, I prefer my icing to be attached to my cupcake. I just like to keep it as an ornament rather than a functional pot. So if you want to have the icing attached, then you need to score and slip both surfaces. So score lines all over the top of the base of the cupcake, so hatching and cross hatching. And again, score lines all over the icing where it's going to be touching the top of the cupcake. Apply a good dollop of slip to one surface. And then secure into place. So I've got some scratch marks that are still visible where I've scored the surface, so I'm just going to use a paintbrush and some water just to smooth those over. Again, I'm just using a paintbrush just to neaten up any bits of icing. I don't want this to look too perfect. I really want it to look like a handmade cupcake, so I like it if the icing's a bit wonky and not entirely perfect. I think that looks better than a sort of factory production ceramic cupcake. So that's the basics of the cupcake done, but now you can add other bits of details to personalise your cupcake. So you may want to add something like a cherry, which I'm going to do just at the top of my cupcake here. I've got a small ball of clay and I'm scoring lines on the icing where I want the cherry to go, and again on the base of the cherry. Just going to apply a bit of slip to one surface and then put that into place, giving it a little twizzle to make sure it's nice and secure. I will show you how to do the stalk a little bit later. So I also want to add hundreds and thousands to my cupcake. You can either do this by adding bits of clay or you can just paint it on afterwards. It's entirely up to you, but if you do want to add it on, what you need to do is to roll out a really long, thin sausage of clay. So just keep going till it's as thin as you want it to be. And you'll find when you roll out clay very thin like this, it dries very quickly. So you can cut it into shapes of roughly equal length. I'm just using a cocktail stick to cut those. And I'm going to use one for the stalk of the cherry. You don't have to have a stalk on your cherry. If you do want to have a stalk, just be prepared, or just let your parents know that they need to be prepared to be gluing it on at least another 49 times over the summer. So don't feel too precious about bits like this if they fall off. I've just made a hole with the cocktail stick. I'm going to put the stalk into the hole. And then I'm going to use my paintbrush with some slip on the end and just fill in the hole around the stalk. This bit really is quite fiddly, so you may want to have an adult to help you with this. So next I'm going to add the hundreds and thousands, and I'm just going to put those on randomly. You can see they're too small to score lines on each piece, so I'm just going to be painting a little bit of water onto the icing and then pushing the clay in place. Some of them may drop off, but hopefully most of them will stay. If you want to cut other shapes, you can. So there you can see I've pretty much covered mine. I tend to go for the more is more approach when it comes to cupcake decorating. So you might be able to see on my examples there on the right hand side that I've actually got gold stars on one of my cupcakes. Now I've used a little icing cutter to create these. You may well have these already at home, particularly if you're into baking or if you've been doing a lot of baking lately. So they're these little cutters, you can get different shapes. I've got stars, I've got flowers, I've got hearts. If you want to use those with the clay, that's absolutely fine, they work brilliantly. You just need to roll out a thin piece of clay, wait for it to be a little bit hard, don't do it when it's too wet or you won't get a nice clean cut. Push the cutter in and then push the plunger to release the shape. So that's all I've done there to create these stars. These are entirely optional, I just thought I'd mention it because I know some of you will have these cutters at home. So there we have it, that's pretty much finished. The last thing we need to do, if you're using earthenware clay that you have from me and that I'm going to be firing, is to make a hole in the bottom of the cupcake. So clay always has to be hollow, and we need to make a hole so that the air can escape, otherwise they will explode in the kiln and I'll have cherries everywhere. So just a small hole, and make sure you push it through till you get to the open cavity of the inside of the cupcake. So there we have the finished cupcake. You can see that it's not perfect, you can see that it looks handmade, you can see that it's a bit wonky in places. All of these add to the charm of the cupcake. Okay, so don't worry if yours looks a little bit lopsided. These look absolutely beautiful when they're painted. You really can go to town on the colours and the decorations. With my two examples that you've seen in the video, one's been painted using poster paint and one's been painted using watercolours. They are my preference for painting clay. You can use acrylics if you like, but just be aware that sometimes the finish is a little bit matte and plasticky. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I cannot wait to see what you make at home. Keep the photos coming in and help spread the word to get more people making art at home.